The missing plane dominating the conversation in Washington tonight, too. Could its disappearance prompt congressional hearings on international air safety here at home? Well, that's an excellent question. Fox News political insiders are here, hopefully, to give us some answers. And you can join in the conversation. Remember I said tune in, chime in? Oh, look, and it's Pat Caddell. It's our conversation on Twitter, @Political Insiders and @Harris Faulkner. It's actually @FN Insiders. John LeBoutillier, former Republican congressman for New York. Doug Schoen, former pollster for President Bill Clinton and Fox News contributor. And joining us by satellite, Pat Caddell, a former pollster for President Jimmy Carter and Fox News contributor. And he's in Charleston, where it's much warmer tonight than it is in New York. Let's start with this plane situation. And you heard Representative King there saying, Congressman King there saying, and many others now saying, the United States is going to have to get to the helm to this thing, otherwise it may not be solved. Why do you think that's the criticism?
The criticism is, I think, fair, because it's been 10, 11 days. Nobody's taking the lead. The Malaysian government has been slow to reach what appears to be the obvious and sad conclusion that there was malfeasance involved at a very senior and serious way. This may be terrorism, what you said in your lead-in, Harris, absolutely right. This is a question of international air safety, and it's a more fundamental question of American leadership around the world. This is another example where we are not providing real leadership.
On just that point, first of all, with 9/11, we should have learned our lesson that you never discount anything, including the possibility that this pilot hijacked this plane for a bad purpose, or someone else hijacked it.
Yeah, nobody really wants to say it because we don't know what the real deal is.
Well, have we become so politically correct since 9/11 that we can't say, wait a second, we got
just asking a question, John.
Right, asking a question. We have a Muslim pilot who the day of this flight went to a criminal trial in Kuala Lumpur where the opposition leader, who is a radical Muslim, Anwar Ibrahim, was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in jail. The pilot was in the courtroom that day and then went right to the airport and did this flight. Now, maybe it means nothing, but one must assume after 9/11, everything could mean something bad.
Pat, you're talking about political correctness, John, and Pat, that is one of your topics that you love to tee off on.
Well, you know what we have, that's why I'm not even sure our involvement would help, because we have basically defanged the FBI and we have our own government agencies into believing that they must be politically correct, that anything that has to do with Islamic terrorism doesn't exist. And yet, as John just pointed out, hey, it's a pretty obvious, at least you ought to say, this is something you ought to explore. And let me say this, we can put devices the insurance companies do in our automobiles, right, if they want to track us. You don't have, at this point, they don't have tracking these 190, 100, $150 million airplanes where they tell you where they are all the time. And I will make one last point. If that plane went south and southwest, we have the single largest secret base outside of Area 21 at Diego Garcia. I mean, it's a vast listening station. And believe me, if they can't pick this up, or they don't know, and at the NSA, they're really good. I think, they're really CIA. They spy on the Congress. They spy on us. They really should have some information, don't you think?
Wow, that's the first time I've heard the NSA used in a positive way in a while.
Well, I think it's a good point. They're spying on us.
Well, we're paying them enough.
They're spying on Americans. They're spying on the U.S. Senate, but they can't find this plane. Now, the president should, if he hasn't already, order the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. That's the one that does all the satellite photography. We should be looking at everywhere on that arc that this plane could be, every airstrip there, going back 2 months ago to see if any extensions were built on any of these airstrips to accommodate a plane.
Interesting.
And then
a longer runway, because you'd need that because the plane was so big.
And then we should be looking the day this thing was gone, that morning, at every picture we can to see if a plane landed there. Now, this is what we've got the technology
And maybe that's happening and we don't know.
Well,
Doug?
let's hope that it is. But, Harris, the administration has not taken a leadership role. We haven't heard from really anybody in our government to say we are going to take the lead on terrorism, on air safety, air piracy.
That is
they're
so
leading from behind, Doug.
Yeah,
but we haven't heard from anybody. We've heard this president have pop-up speeches on everything.
All he's doing, Harris, and I know we'll get to it, is having endless conversations with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Putin has annexed Crimea, as we said he would, and the potential for an invasion into Ukraine is ever present.
All right, we're going to talk more about that coming up, but I got to get to what's on fire right now on my Twitter page, and that's because I had asked before the commercial break earlier what people think about this giveaway, if you will, of web control. And we had Brad Blakeman, who was formerly with the President George W. Bush's administration as a deputy assistant, on Fox Report last night, and here's what he had to say about it. Let's watch that.
Countries like China and Russia and Cuba and other countries are now seeking to have a say in who gets access to the internet. I think it's dangerous for America. I don't think it should happen. And we should control it. We made it. We paid for it. It's ours.
The domain system on Twitter, James says, no, we shouldn't give up our control over domain names. Obama, meaning president, I'm sure, will give away anything as long as our enemies might like him. This according to James. Mac Boney writes, with cyber warfare like it is, giving up control of any part of the internet is a foolish national security mistake. Doug?
Mac Boney is exactly right, Harris. We are facing cyber warfare around the world, from the Russians and the Chinese particularly. Just now we're seeing that in Ukraine, the Russians have disabled sites of the former Ukrainian government prior to their invasion. So bottom line, this is a huge, huge national security risk. And again, our government is silent.
But it fits.
Well, they're worse than silent. Let's understand something. They do what they do all the time, which is surrender whatever advantages this country has. Whatever advantages, whatever we dominate, their idea is we should get out, we should lead from behind, we should give it up. And just like they're letting Eastern Europe go, they let the internet go. This government in Washington, and I hate to say our party, has decided to surrender the country.
Well,
and the internet is just part of it.
It fits a pattern that both Doug and Pat are mentioning. The biggest one to me is the space race. Our primacy in space. Who could believe that we cannot today put an astronaut in orbit? Or in office either. We have to put them in office. Yeah, we have to rent space on a Soyuz from the Russians, right? The president, upon taking office in 2009, yanked all the missile defense systems out of Hungary and Poland. It is a pattern of retreat and sort of a psychological surrender.
Wow.
I'm glad John mentioned the space race, because that is exactly the example. And we are now having our enemies, our adversaries, the Russians, having to depend on them. And the Republican Party will not fight for any of this either. No one in Washington will.
You know, it's interesting. I hear all of you talking, and Russia keeps coming up. We can't stop talking about President Putin. But when you look at it,
he's the 800-pound gorilla on the world stage. There was a poll last week. Who's a more effective president, right? Obama or Putin? And this was asked, I think maybe worldwide, I forget. And Putin was an effective president. He's getting what he wants. Our president gets nothing.
Attention now shifting to Russian President Vladimir Putin, which we said before the commercial break. Well, attention seems to shift to him a lot. Our own Secretary of State, though, saying this with regard to trying to keep the peace as more Russian troops are landing in Ukraine tonight. Watch this.
We hope President Putin will recognize that none of what we're saying is meant as a threat. It's not meant as in a personal way. It is meant as a matter of respect for the international multilateral structure that we have lived by since World War II.
You know, I don't know what President Putin watches, but if he happened to see that from the secretary, what do you think his reaction was, Doug?
I think it would be disdain and derision. He would laugh. Bottom line, there's only one thing Vladimir Putin responds to, and that's pressure, power, and strength. We should be not having endless conversations with him. We should be telling him the sanctions that are going to be imposed, taking steps with our allies. But even if we don't get the Europeans to come with us, making it very clear that we will not allow him to overrun Ukraine and to alter that structure willy-nilly.
Say the same thing Doug and Pat are going to say a little differently. Mao Zedong, used to use this saying all the time, Harris. Proceed with bayonet. If you encounter steel, retreat. If you encounter mush, continue. That was mush. And Obama is mush. And Putin just says, I can roll right in there and do whatever I want. And Obama takes action unilaterally against American businesses a lot more aggressively, overtime rules, minimum wage, all that stuff, than he does against this. He's dillied for 2 weeks on this thing.
Pat Caddell, the leader of your party, the Democrats, is that fair criticism?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, any American should be saying, look, I described like a week or so ago that Putin had measured Obama and had his Neville Chamberlain. We just saw Lord Halifax there, the foreign minister. You know, let me tell you something. There's a great scene in Judgment at Nuremberg in which Burt Lancaster is explaining in the docket why his country, Germany, let Hitler succeed. And he says, you people in the world did it. You said, take the Rhineland, take Austria, take the Sudetenland. That's what we're doing. Why should he stop? He's going to invade the Ukraine. No one is going to stop him. This is, you know, unfortunately, this is the 100th anniversary of 1914. And boy, the similarities to the 20th century, Mr. Kerry, are quite great.
Oh, that's poignant. All right, we're going to move on, but we're going to keep you guys. Twitter is alive, and I'll be sharing some of those. Stay put. The political insiders will respond to this. Republican David Jolly, I don't know if you were keeping track this week, victorious in a special House election in the battleground state of Florida. He defeated a well-funded Democrat in the state President Obama won in both elections. Our political insiders are back. John, Doug, Pat by satellite. By the way, they want to know what bridge is behind you in Charleston. Do some homework on that, Pat. We'll get that from you in a minute.
That's the Ravenel Bridge.
Oh, it is. A woman on Twitter loves the place. She says it's great. So your thoughts about David Jolly's win?
Look, Harris, I believe that in a district that Obama won twice, Sink won running for statewide office for controller and governor, bottom line, to use my favorite expression, this is a huge, huge setback for the Democrats. It suggests to me that the Senate is actively in play. Jolly was a weak candidate. The Democrats also benefited by a libertarian who got 5%. This means that the Democratic Party and Obamacare are deeply at risk.
Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Pat, said that, oh, really, you shouldn't worry about Obamacare. You can't really run on that, Republicans. You're making too much out of it.
Well, you know, Barbara Tuchman, a great historian, once delivered at West Point their lectures. It became a book called The March of Folly, about wooden-headedness in public policy and politics. Why are people in this endeavor so stupid? It is because they cannot admit they're wrong. What we have is the Democrats running, and as Doug said, look, this race would have been 7 points without the Libertarian, which somehow Democrats always manage to have in the race. The Republicans are too stupid to have Green Party people. But in any event, what you have there is a terrible candidate, a lobbyist, for God's sakes, running at a time instead of an insurgent against a candidate who almost won for governor and is quite good and was expected to win. And here's the thing. Democrats keep saying, oh, we got the slogan, we're going to fix Obamacare. Yet the Republicans let them get away with the fact that they never propose any solutions other than skip the election. On the other side, the Republicans refuse to have something to replace Obamacare.
I want to give you the last word, John.
Okay, as the three of us knew when we talked about this before, this race would be used by the winner and the loser to set the tone for how they're going to run all their campaigns for this coming November, right? And the Republicans now think all we have to do is run against Obamacare, not propose our own alternative plan for Obamacare, and we can still win the Senate and keep the House. And Democrats, I think, privately are panic-stricken. Nancy Pelosi can say Republicans are wasting their time, but the Democrats running for re-election are worried to death.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Twitter is alive, and no one believes we should give up control of our internet. Jerry Moore says, absolutely not. We got to keep it. We should roar no, is what he says.
Don't give up the internet and don't give up Ukraine.
More on the investigation into the missing plane coming up.